The man who promised to marry her never came. The truth settled into her chest before anyone spoke it aloud. She stood on the wooden platform with her hands locked around her small carpet bag, knuckles pale, breath shallow. People were already looking. Some too long. Some with smiles that cut. Ruby Ellison felt it the way a person feels cold before the snow ever falls. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. A young man laughed behind her. Another leaned close to whisper. Ruby didn't turn. She kept her eyes forward, spine straight, as if pride alone could hold her upright. She had crossed half a country on faith. She would not crumble on a train platform. The stagecoach driver climbed down and hauled luggage away. Horses snorted. Boots hit wood. Life moved on around her. And still, no one spoke her name. She waited. 5 days of dust and rattling wheels had brought her here. 5 nights of poor sleep and tighter prayers. She had left behind a gray ocean town and a life that never fit her shape. She had followed ink on paper, a man's neat handwriting, a promise of steadiness, of marriage, of belonging. Now the platform was nearly empty. A station clerk finally approached, his voice careful. "Miss, are you expecting someone?" Ruby swallowed. "Yes, sir. His name is Thomas Hale." The clerk frowned, then shook his head. "Can't say I know him." The words landed heavy. Ruby nodded anyway. "Thank you." She stepped down from the platform and onto the packed dirt street of Briar Junction. Wind swept through town, sharp and dry, tugging at her coat. It cut through the thin wool like it meant to punish her, but she barely felt it. The looks were worse. Men glanced and nudged each other. Women stared, then looked away. Ruby felt every inch of herself under their eyes. Her hips, her shoulders, the way her dress pulled instead of hung. She had known this her whole life. Knew what people saw first. She had hoped the West might be different. She waited another hour. When the sun dipped lower, the truth settled fully. Thomas Hale was not coming. Either he had vanished, or he had seen her from a distance and chosen not to claim her. That thought hurt the most. The station clerk pointed her toward a boarding house at the edge of town. Ruby thanked him, her voice steady despite the ache spreading through her chest. She walked alone. Each step felt louder than the last. The boarding house door opened before she knocked. A broad woman with silvering hair stood there, her eyes kind but tired. "You look worn clear through," the woman said gently. "Come in, dear." Ruby hesitated only a moment. "I need a room, just for the night." "No questions," the woman replied. "Name's Mrs. Calder." Inside smelled of soap and old wood. Safe, quiet. Ruby's throat tightened. "My fiancé didn't meet me," she said softly, forcing the words out before fear stole them back. Mrs. Calder sighed, not in surprise, but in sadness. "I've seen that more times than I like." Those words nearly broke her. Upstairs, alone in a narrow room, Ruby finally let herself sit. Her carpet bag slid to the floor. Her shoulders followed. Tears came without sound. She pressed her hand to her mouth and shook until the worst of it passed. By morning, she told herself, she would find answers. She spent the next day walking Briar Junction, the general store, the blacksmith. The saloon door she didn't quite step through. Each time she asked the same question. Each time she received the same look. A clerk at the feed store paused. "Thomas Hale? Think he passed through months back. Talked about selling land. Might be gone east or south." Gone. Behind her, someone snorted. "Guess he took one look and ran." Heat flooded Ruby's face. She didn't turn. She didn't argue. She walked out with her chin high and her heart cracking open. She didn't see the man leaning against the post outside. Tall, broad, quiet as stone. His name was Luke Mercer. He had come down from the high country for supplies. He heard the laugh, saw Ruby's shoulders stiffen as she passed. Something about it struck him harder than he expected. Maybe because he knew that look. The look of being weighed and found lacking by strangers. Luke watched her disappear down the street. He did not follow. Not yet. That evening, the town doctor mentioned her in passing. "Poor thing," he said, "left behind, staying at Calder's." Luke said nothing, but his jaw set. He wasn't a man who interfered. He lived alone for a reason. But he believed in one thing above all others. You didn't leave a person to face cruelty alone. The boarding house parlor was dim when he arrived. Mrs. Calder studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward the far chair. "She's hurting," she said, "but she's proud." Luke removed his hat. "I won't disrespect that." Ruby sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When he spoke, his voice was low. "Careful, ma'am." She looked up fast, wiping her face, embarrassment flaring. "Yes?" "My name's Luke Mercer. I heard what happened. Thought I might offer help." Her brow creased. "You don't even know me." "I know you're alone." That was enough to make her throat ache. "I've got a cabin in the mountains," he continued. "It's warm, quiet. You could stay a while. No expectations." Fear stirred. A stranger. A mountain. But behind the fear was something else, relief. "May I think on it?" she asked. Luke nodded. "I'll be at the livery at first light." That night, Ruby barely slept. Every doubt came back to sit beside her. But so did a fragile hope she hadn't felt since stepping off the stage. At dawn, she packed. Luke was already waiting. "You sure?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "Yes." And with that, Ruby Ellison stepped away from the town that had judged her and toward a life she could not yet imagine. The town fell away behind them slowly, like it was reluctant to let her go. Ruby sat stiff in the saddle, hands clenched around the horn, every muscle tight with effort and nerves. She had ridden before, but never far, and never with her whole future balanced on the next step forward. The horse sensed her unease and shifted beneath her, steady but watchful. Luke rode a short distance ahead. Not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to abandon her. That alone eased something in her chest. They moved through open land first. Dry grasses bent in the wind. The sky stretched wide and pale above them, so big it made Ruby feel small in a way that wasn't cruel. Just honest. By mid-morning, the air grew cooler. Pines appeared along the rise, their dark shapes standing guard. They stopped near a creek when the sun reached its highest point. Luke dismounted and tied the horses without a word. Ruby followed, slower, careful not to stumble. She hated feeling clumsy, hated being watched while she was. Luke pretended not to notice. He gathered wood, built a small fire. When he handed her a tin cup of water, their fingers brushed by accident. Ruby flinched, then felt foolish for it. "Sorry," she murmured. "No need," he said gently. They ate in silence. Hard bread, dried meat. Simple food, but it warmed her all the same. Ruby studied the way Luke moved. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried. He seemed shaped by this land rather than set against it. Finally she spoke. "Why do you live so far from town?" Luke stared into the fire before answering. "People like to measure each other. Out here, there's no one keeping score." Ruby nodded slowly. She understood that better than she wanted to admit. They rode again until the light softened, and shadows stretched long across the trail. Ruby's legs ached. Her back burned, but she refused to complain. Pain felt honest, earned, and for once, it didn't feel lonely. They camped beneath tall pines that night. Luke set his bedroll a respectful distance away. He handed her a blanket thicker than her own without comment. When she looked up to thank him, he had already turned away. Stars filled the sky, more than she had ever seen. Ruby lay awake, listening to the fire pop and the wind whisper through needles. Fear still lingered, but it no longer owned her. Something else was growing in its place. Trust, fragile, new. By the next afternoon, the cabin appeared between the trees. It wasn't large, just sturdy. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. The sight of it surprised her with a sudden ache in her throat. It looked lived in. Not grand, not lonely, just real. "This is it," Luke said. He helped her down from the saddle. Careful and brief. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood and clean air. Light filtered through small windows. Everything had a place. "This room's yours," he said, opening a narrow door. "You can stay as long as you need." Ruby touched the edge of the bed. Solid, warm. She nodded, afraid to speak. The days that followed were harder than anything she had known back east. Chopping wood bruised her palms. Carrying water left her breathless. The cold bit deeper up here, but each ache brought a strange satisfaction. She was needed. Luke taught without lecturing, corrected without mocking. When she stumbled, he waited. When she succeeded, he simply nodded, as if he had never doubted her. One morning, he placed a rifle in her hands. "You should know how to protect yourself," he said. Her first shot startled her so badly she yelped. Luke laughed once, soft and surprised. The sound warmed her more than the fire ever had. "You'll get it," he said. And she did. Evenings were quieter. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. Ruby told him about the gray ocean she grew up beside, about rooms that always felt too small. Luke spoke of winters alone, of learning to listen to storms. Weeks passed. Her body grew stronger, her hands steadier. The woman who had arrived trembling in Briar Junction felt farther away with each sunrise. Then, one evening, a knock came at the door. Luke stiffened before he even stood. A trapper stepped inside, eyes roaming. When his gaze landed on Ruby, something shifted. "Didn't expect to see a woman up here," the man said. "Town's still talking about that mail-order bride who got left." Quote. Ruby's chest tightened. Luke stepped forward. Just one step. But it was enough. "Her name is Ruby," he said quietly. "This is my home. You'll speak with respect." The trapper raised his hands, mumbled an apology, but the damage lingered after he left. Ruby sat on the cabin steps later, staring into the trees. Luke joined her without a word. "You ain't what they say," he murmured. She swallowed. "Then what am I?" Luke looked at her fully. Not her shape, not her scars. Her, stronger than they'll ever understand. The words settled deep. That night, as the fire burned low, Luke lay awake longer than usual. He had built his life around solitude, around silence. But now, the quiet felt different. And for the first time in years, he wondered what it might mean to not be alone. Winter crept in quietly at first. The mornings grew sharper. Frost clung to the ground long after sunrise. Ruby woke one dawn to find the creek rimmed with ice, thin as glass, cracking softly as water pushed beneath it. She stood there longer than needed, breathing in the cold, realizing she no longer felt like a guest. This place had begun to claim her. Inside the cabin, life settled into a rhythm. Ruby rose early, sometimes before Luke, and set water to heat. She swept the floor, patched clothes, learned which herbs Luke kept hanging for aches and cuts. Her hands moved with more confidence now. Her back stayed straighter. Luke noticed everything. He just didn't say much. When the first heavy snow fell, it came fast and hard. Wind slammed against the cabin walls like it meant to break through. Ruby watched the storm from the window, heart thudding. "Does it always come on like this?" she asked. Luke nodded. "Mountains don't give much warning." That night the fire burned bright. They sat closer than usual, boots drying, shoulders almost touching. Ruby could feel the heat of him beside her, solid, steady. It made her chest feel strangely full. She spoke without looking at him. "I used to think being alone meant being unwanted." Luke shifted. "What do you think now?" She considered it. "Now I think being alone can mean no one ever learned how to stay." Silence followed, not awkward, heavy with understanding. Days later, Luke took ill. It started small. A cough he brushed off. Slower steps when hauling wood. Ruby noticed before he did. She always noticed first. It was a habit born from years of watching moods, weather, and rooms for danger. "You're burning up," she said one evening, pressing her hand to his forehead. "I'm fine," Luke muttered, but his voice lacked strength. By morning, he collapsed in the snow. Ruby heard the sound from inside the cabin. A dull thud. Her heart seized. She ran out without her coat, boots slipping, breath tearing from her lungs. "Luke!" He was on one knee, head bowed, shaking. His skin was hot, too hot. Fear crashed over her, sharp and blinding. She dragged him inside, inch by inch, muscles screaming, refusing to let go. When she finally got him onto the bed, he was barely conscious. The fever took hold fast. Luke tossed beneath the blankets, words spilling from him that made no sense. Ruby soaked cloths, pressed them to his skin, whispered things she didn't realize she felt until they left her mouth. "You're not allowed to go," she told him. "Not now." 2 days passed in a blur. She barely slept, barely ate. The fire nearly died twice before she caught it. When his breathing worsened, panic clawed at her chest. She knew what had to be done. At dawn, she saddled the horse herself. Snow stung her face. The wind howled like it wanted to turn her back. She didn't listen. She rode hard for town. The doctor returned with her by nightfall, fighting the storm. His face was grave as he worked. "The fever's strong," he said. "All you can do now is keep him warm, keep him drinking, pray." Ruby did all three. She sat by Luke's side, holding his hand, feeling its strength ebb and return in waves. When he shook with chills, she wrapped herself closer. When his breath faltered, she spoke his name again and again, like a promise. On the third morning, his eyes opened. They were clearer, tired. But there. "You stayed," he rasped. Tears blurred Ruby's vision. "Of course I stayed." Luke's fingers brushed her cheek, weak, gentle, full of something unspoken. "Thank you," he murmured, "for fighting for me." She pressed her forehead to his hand. "I'd do it again." Recovery was slow, painful. Luke hated needing help. Ruby didn't let him push her away. She fed him broth, helped him stand, sat with him when frustration darkened his eyes. And something changed. Not suddenly. Quietly. Luke watched her now with a warmth that made her chest ache. Ruby felt it too, in the way he said her name, in the way the cabin felt smaller, safer, fuller. Then the letter came. A peddler stopped by one afternoon, stamping snow from his boots. He handed Ruby an envelope. The name on it made her stomach drop. She didn't open it right away. That night, after Luke fell asleep, she read it by firelight. Apologies, regret, promises. A train ticket tucked inside. A new life offered late. Ruby stepped outside, snow crunching beneath her boots. The mountains loomed around her, dark and familiar. Luke appeared in the doorway, pale but standing. "You thinking of going?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. He looked down. "You deserve more than this place, more than me." Ruby turned to him, heart pounding. What if this is more? Luke swallowed, fear and hope warring in his eyes. The question hung between them, fragile and unanswered. And Ruby knew the choice she made next would change everything. Ruby did not answer him right away. The cold pressed in around them, sharp and quiet. Snow rested heavy on the branches, as if the whole mountain were holding its breath. Luke stood in the doorway, shoulders tense, eyes lowered like a man already bracing for loss. Ruby folded the letter once, then again. Her hands were steady now. "He says he's sorry," she said at last. "Says he made a mistake." Luke nodded slowly. "Men often do. He says he can give me a good life, a city, comfort." She looked up at him then. "He says he wants me back." Luke's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but the silence spoke loud enough. Ruby stepped closer. "What do you think I should do?" Luke exhaled through his nose. A man ought to keep his word. If he can't, maybe another man can offer what he couldn't. His voice dropped. You shouldn't stay out of pity. That stung more than she expected. I wouldn't, she said softly. I never would. Luke finally met her eyes. There was fear there, bare, honest. It made her chest ache. That night, Ruby slept little. The letter lay folded on the table, its weight heavier than paper should be. She thought of train whistles, of crowded streets, of being seen again before she was known. She thought of firelight, of quiet mornings, of hands that helped without asking anything in return. By dawn, her heart had settled. Luke was outside when she stepped into the cold, testing his leg, moving stiff but upright. She watched him for a moment before speaking. I'm not going, she said. He froze. You're sure? Quote. She nodded. He wanted me once I became an idea again. You wanted me when I was standing in front of you. Luke's breath caught. Ruby. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him despite the cold. I don't need everything. I need kindness. I need safety. I need a place where I'm not something to be judged. Luke's hands trembled at his sides. I can't promise you ease. I don't want ease, she said. I want truth. Silence stretched. Then Luke reached for her hands, held them like they were something precious and breakable. I don't want you to go, he said. The words came rough. I want you here, with me, as my wife, if you'd have me. Ruby felt the world tilt. Yes, she whispered, tears burning her eyes. Yes, Luke. They did not rush it. Winter loosened its grip slowly. Snow melted into the soil. The air softened. When spring finally came, they stood beneath tall pines with the doctor reading from a worn Bible. No crowd, no judgment, just vows spoken plain and true. Ruby Ellison became Ruby Mercer. Life did not suddenly grow easy, but it grew full. They worked side by side, laughed more, spoke freely. Love settled between them like something that had always belonged there. Months later, they rode into Briar Junction together to file the papers. Heads turned. Whispers followed. But Ruby walked tall, Luke's hand steady at her back. A man stepped forward, one who had laughed once. I was wrong, he muttered. Ruby met his eyes. I know. As they turned to leave, a stagecoach rolled in. A man stepped down, well-dressed, familiar. Thomas Hale stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. Ruby, he breathed, you look different. She smiled. I am. Luke helped her into the wagon. Their hands fit easily together. As they rode away, the mountains rose ahead of them. Home. Ruby leaned into Luke's shoulder, certain now. She had not been claimed, she had chosen. Spring did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. Thin green shoots pushed through the damp soil. Snow lingered in the shadows while sunlight warmed the open ground. Ruby noticed everything. The way the creek ran faster. The way birds returned. Cautious but hopeful. Marriage did not change Luke overnight. He was still quiet, still careful with words. But something in him had softened. He reached for Ruby's hand more often, stood closer, slept easier knowing she was beside him. Ruby changed too. She no longer woke with the old knot of worry in her chest. The fear of being unwanted had loosened its grip. Not vanished, but quieted. Some wounds healed slow. She accepted that now. One morning, while hanging laundry, she paused and pressed a hand to her side, breath catching. Luke noticed immediately. You all right? She nodded, then shook her head. Just dizzy for a moment. He frowned, watched her more closely after that. The feeling returned days later. Then, again. Ruby tried to ignore it. She didn't want to make trouble out of nothing. But when nausea hit her hard enough to send her to her knees, Luke was at her side in an instant. We're going to town, he said, not a question. The doctor confirmed it with a gentle smile. You're with child. Ruby sat very still. The words felt unreal, like a dream spoken aloud. Luke didn't speak at all. He just stared at her, eyes wide, then dropped his head and let out a shaky breath. That night, back at the cabin, Ruby sat on the bed, hands folded. Fear crept in despite the joy. She had been told once she might never carry a child, that her body was wrong, unfit. Luke knelt in front of her, took her hands. "I don't care if it's a boy or girl," he said. "I don't care if it's strong or small. I just want you safe." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'm scared." "I know," he said. "We'll be scared together." The months that followed were hard. Ruby's body changed. Some days she felt powerful. Other days she felt fragile and clumsy all over again. Luke hovered more than she liked, but she let him. Love looked different than pity. She knew that now. Summer brought long days and heavy heat. Ruby learned when to rest, when to push. Luke learned patience in a new way. He listened more, asked instead of assumed. One evening, a storm rolled in fast. Thunder cracked so close it shook the cabin. Ruby startled, breath sharp, pain flaring low in her belly. Luke was at her side in seconds. The baby came early. The hours blurred into something fierce and endless. Pain stole her breath. Fear tried to take her courage. Luke held her through it all, voice steady even when his hands trembled. By dawn, a cry split the quiet. A daughter. Ruby wept when they laid the tiny, squirming bundle against her chest. She had never seen anything so small, so strong. Luke's eyes filled when he touched the baby's hand. "She's perfect," he whispered. They named her Hannah. Word traveled faster than Ruby expected. By autumn, visitors came. Some out of kindness, some out of curiosity. One afternoon, Thomas Hale arrived. Ruby saw him from the window. Her heart thudded, but it did not race like before. She stepped outside to meet him. "I heard you married," he said awkwardly. His eyes flicked to the baby in her arms. "I did," Ruby replied calmly. "I made a mistake," he said. "I should have come for you." She looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, not with regret, just clarity. "You didn't want me," she said. "You wanted the idea of me. I needed someone who wanted the truth." Thomas nodded, shame heavy on his face. "I'm glad you found that." "So am I." He left quietly. That night, Ruby sat with Hannah asleep against her chest, firelight dancing on the walls. Luke wrapped an arm around her. "Do you ever wish it had gone different?" he asked. She shook her head. "If it had, I wouldn't be here. With you. With her." Luke kissed her temple. "I'll spend my life earning this." Ruby smiled softly. "You already are." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, gentle now, no longer biting, no longer cruel, just passing through. Autumn deepened the mountains in quiet ways. The air sharpened again, but it no longer felt cruel. Smoke curled from the chimney most mornings. Leaves burned gold and red before slipping away. Ruby learned the sound of each hour by heart. The creak at dawn, Hannah's soft breathing at midday, the fire settling low at night. Motherhood reshaped her in ways she hadn't expected. Not softer, stronger. She carried Hannah close while she worked, humming under her breath. The baby's weight against her chest felt grounding, real. Luke watched them with an expression Ruby couldn't quite name at first. Awe, maybe, gratitude, a kind of wonder that still surprised him. Some nights, when Hannah finally slept, Ruby would step outside with Luke. They stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the stars. Silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. "You ever think about how close we came to missing all this?" Luke asked once. Ruby smiled. "I try not to." Winter returned, firm but fair. They were ready this time. Wood stacked high, food stored away, Hannah bundled and warm. When storms howled, Ruby no longer felt afraid. The cabin held. Luke held. She held herself. Word spread beyond Briar Junction eventually. Not the cruel kind, the quiet kind. About the woman who had been left behind and built a life anyway. About the mountain man who chose her without hesitation. Visitors slowed. Life steadied. One afternoon, Ruby caught her reflection in the small mirror by the door. Lines of work showed in her hands. Strength showed in her shoulders. Peace showed in her eyes. She thought of the woman who stepped off the stagecoach months ago, clutching her bag like it was all she had. She wished she could tell her something. You will be loved, not despite who you are. Because of it. Spring returned once more. Hannah learned to walk on uneven ground, Luke's hands hovering close, never touching unless needed. Ruby laughed more freely now. The sound startled birds from branches. They made the journey into town again one bright morning. Papers to file. Supplies to buy. Hannah rode between them, bundled and curious. People noticed. Of course they did. But the stares no longer pierced. Some nodded. Some smiled. One woman stopped Ruby and said, "You look happy." "I am," Ruby replied simply. At the edge of town, a familiar figure stood waiting. Thomas Hale. Ruby felt the moment pass through her and leave without pain. Luke slowed the wagon, uncertain. Ruby laid a hand on his arm. "It's all right." Thomas looked older, smaller. His eyes held regret, but not entitlement. "I heard you had a family," he said. "I do." "I'm glad," he said quietly. "You deserve that." Ruby nodded. "I know." There was nothing more to say. They rode on. The climb back into the mountains felt easier than it ever had. The road knew them now. The land did too. When the cabin came into view, Ruby felt a familiar warmth bloom in her chest. Home. That night, as Hannah slept, Ruby and Luke sat by the fire. Flames danced. Shadows stretched and faded. "You ever wonder what folks will say about us years from now?" Luke asked. Ruby leaned into him. "Maybe they'll say we were stubborn." Luke chuckled. "Fair. Maybe they'll say we were brave." He nodded. "Or maybe," she said softly, "they won't say anything at all, and that's all right." Luke kissed her hair. "I don't need anyone else's words." Neither did she. Life did not turn perfect. There were hard days, scares, losses small and large. But the foundation held: respect, choice, love that did not demand shrinking. Ruby had not been saved. She had been seen, and, in being seen, she had found the courage to choose a life that fit her shape, her heart, and her strength. As the fire burned low, Ruby reached for Luke's hand. He squeezed back, steady as ever. The mountains stood around them, silent witnesses. And the woman who once arrived with nothing but hope now had everything that mattered.